Labor minister torn apart on Sky News over U-turn disaster. Let me finish. Picture this. A cabinet minister on live television desperately trying to explain why everything her government said last month doesn't actually count anymore, while a presenter systematically dismantles every excuse with the precision of a surgeon and the patience of someone who's had absolutely enough. That's exactly what happened when Sky News' Sophy Ridge sat down with Transport Secretary Heidi Alexander. And honestly, it was the kind of car crash you can't look away from. Except this time, the Transport Secretary couldn't even fix the wreckage. We're talking interruptions, denials, dodgy audio excuses, and a masterclass in how not to defend your government's record. So grab your popcorn, settle in, and let's dissect what happens when a labor minister walks into the firing line armed with nothing but talking points and hope. Spoiler alert, it doesn't go well. Right off the bat, Sophy Ridge wasn't messing about. She came out swinging with the digital ID fiasco, which at this point has become Labor's poster child for policy confusion. Ridge laid it out plain and simple. You told us mandatory digital ID cards for all workers were happening. The Prime Minister stood up and said it was crucial for stopping people slipping into the shadow economy, and now you've completely changed your mind. It's not complicated. It's a straightforward accusation, backed by actual receipts. The kind of journalism that makes politicians squirm because there's no wiggle room. You said this thing, you're now doing a different thing, explain yourself. But here's where it gets properly entertaining. Heidi Alexander tries to jump in immediately, clearly ready with her pre-prepared defense, and Ridge just shuts it down with the most beautifully passive-aggressive line. If I could finish the question, that'd be really appreciated. That right there is the journalistic equivalent of a teacher giving you the death stare when you start talking before she's finished. It's polite, it's professional, but it's also absolutely dripping with "sit down and let me do my job." You can practically feel the temperature drop through the screen. Ridge wasn't asking permission, she was establishing who controls this interview, and the answer definitely wasn't the Transport Secretary. Once Ridge actually gets to finish her question, she goes for the jugular with a point that's been bubbling under the surface of British politics for months now. She acknowledges the standard defense that politicians always wheel out about U-turns being evidence of listening and adapting. We've all heard it a million times. But then she drops the hammer. This government has done 13 U-turns, and if you're positioning yourself as a reforming administration, doesn't it look absolutely terrible that you crumble the second you face any pushback? It's the perfect question because it forces Alexander to either admit the government's weak or deny reality. There's no good answer. It's a political checkmate dressed up as polite inquiry. Alexander's response is fascinating in how desperately it tries to reframe the entire conversation. She flat out denies that Labor's done 13 U-turns, which is a bold strategy when the receipts are literally everywhere. Her defense? Some of those things weren't even in the manifesto, which is such a weird line of argument because it basically implies that the only promises that count are the ones formally written down in that one specific document. Everything else the Prime Minister says, all the policy announcements, the press conferences, the solemn declarations at lecterns in Downing Street, apparently that's all just vibes and shouldn't be taken seriously. It's the political equivalent of, I had my fingers crossed, so it doesn't count. Sophy Ridge absolutely pounces on this nonsense like a cat on a particularly slow mouse. She fires back with beautiful simplicity. So you're saying it only counts when it's in the manifesto, which means we shouldn't trust what the Prime Minister tells us. It's perfect because it exposes the absurdity of Alexander's position. If government ministers can announce policies, defend them vigorously, insist they're vital for national security or economic stability or whatever, and then just drop them while claiming they never really promised them anyway, what's the point of listening to anything they say? Ridge has basically cornered Alexander into either admitting Labor breaks promises or admitting that most of what they say publicly is meaningless hot air. Neither option is great optics. Then Ridge starts listing all the other areas where Labor's backtracked, hitting welfare spending and the farmers' inheritance tax debacle. And suddenly, Alexander's got technical difficulties. She claims she can't hear Ridge properly. Now, to be fair, remote interviews can genuinely have audio issues. It's a real thing that happens. But the timing is absolutely spectacular, isn't it? Just as the presenter's running through a damning list of broken promises, suddenly the connection gets dodgy and the minister can't quite make out what's being said. It's the sort of coincidence that makes you raise one eyebrow and wonder whether someone's frantically adjusting their earpiece hoping the awkward questions will somehow disappear. Whether it was genuine technical problems or convenient selective hearing, the optics are absolutely dreadful. When Alexander does respond, she pivots to the two-child benefit cap, trying to argue that Labor was always clear they'd set up a child poverty task force and look at every available lever, which is fine, except that's not what Ridge was asking about. The question was about the pattern of U-turns, not the specific policy mechanics of one particular issue. It's classic political deflection. When you can't answer the question you've been asked, answer a different question that you're more comfortable with and hope nobody notices. But Ridge very much notices and jumps straight back in, accusing Labor of doing a U-turn on child poverty. Alexander's response is almost desperate in its repetition. I don't believe it is a U-turn. No, I don't believe it is a U-turn. Saying it twice doesn't make it more convincing. It just makes it sound like you're trying to convince yourself as much as the audience. What's absolutely fascinating about this exchange is how it reveals the fundamental communications problem Labor's facing. They came into government promising to be different, to be competent, to provide stability after years of conservative chaos. The entire pitch was, we're the adult in the room, we'll get things done properly. But when you're constantly changing direction, walking back policies, and then insisting that actually you never really promised those things anyway, you look exactly like the government you replaced. It doesn't matter whether individual policy changes are sensible or not. What matters is the overall impression of a government that doesn't know what it's doing and hopes we won't notice. Alexander tries to recover by talking about how she was honest with constituents before the election, saying she wasn't sure the financial realities would allow action on certain issues, which is an interesting admission because it basically confirms that Labor knew they were making promises they probably couldn't keep. She frames it as honesty, but you could just as easily interpret it as we knew we were overselling what we could deliver, but did it anyway to win votes. It's the classic politician's bind. Be honest about limitations and get accused of lacking ambition, or promise the world and get accused of lying when you can't deliver. There's no winning move. Then she pivots to trust in politics, which is where the defense gets really shaky. Alexander starts listing Labor's supposed achievements, claiming they've brought stability back to the economy with interest rates cut 6 times and inflation falling, which sounds great until you remember that interest rates and inflation are controlled by the Bank of England, not the government. Labor can't take credit for monetary policy decisions made by an independent institution. It's like taking credit for the weather being nice because you wore your lucky socks. The two things aren't connected, but if you say it confidently enough, maybe people won't notice. She also boasts a record investment in the NHS and delivering over 5 million appointments when they'd only promised 2 million. On paper, that sounds brilliant. Over-delivering on a manifesto commitment is exactly what governments should be doing. But context matters. The NHS is an absolute crisis. Waiting lists are still astronomical, staff are leaving in droves because they're burnt out and underpaid. 5 million extra appointments sounds impressive until you realize it's nowhere near enough to fix the fundamental problems with the health service. It's like bailing water out of the Titanic with a teaspoon and claiming you're making excellent progress because you filled a whole bucket. The phrase, change is going to take time, is doing an enormous amount of heavy lifting in Alexander's arguments. It's the ultimate get-out clause for a government that hasn't delivered what it promised. You can excuse absolutely anything by saying it's a work in progress, give us more time, Rome wasn't built in a day. Which is fine to a point, but at some stage you need to show actual results rather than just asking for patience indefinitely. Voters gave Labor a massive majority specifically to deliver change quickly and decisively. If the message now is, actually, it's all going to take ages and you need to lower your expectations, that's a recipe for disillusionment and electoral punishment. What makes this interview so compelling is that it's not really about digital IDs or any single policy. It's about credibility. Can we trust what this government says? Do they mean what they promise, or are they just saying whatever sounds good in the moment and figuring out the details later? Sophy Ridge was asking the questions that millions of voters are thinking but don't get the chance to ask directly. When a minister can't give straight answers to basic questions about why policies keep changing, it corrodes public faith in the entire political system, not just in Labor, but in the idea that any government can be trusted to do what they say. The frustration in Ridge's questioning reflects a broader exhaustion of political doublespeak. We're all sick of politicians treating us like we're stupid, expecting us not to notice when they contradict themselves or pretend things they clearly said never actually happened. The digital ID thing is a perfect example. We all saw Keir Starmer at that lectern talking about how important it was. We all heard the government ministers defending it on broadcast media. And now we're supposed to just accept that actually it was never really a firm commitment and we're all misremembering? That's genuinely insulting to voters' intelligence. What's particularly brutal for labor is that they're being judged by the standards they set for themselves. When you spend years in opposition criticizing the conservatives for incompetence, chaos, and broken promises, you don't get to use those same tactics when you're in power and expect a free pass. The bar was set high deliberately because that was the entire basis for removing the previous government. If Labour behaves exactly like the Tories did, just with different colored rosettes, what was the point of the whole exercise? Voters wanted actual change, not just a personnel reshuffle. The interview also highlights how difficult it is to defend the indefensible. Heidi Alexander is clearly a competent politician who's done her prep and knows her brief. But when the brief itself is fundamentally contradictory, there's no slick communication strategy that makes that look good. You can see her trying to deploy every trick in the book, pivot to achievements, question the premise, claim technical difficulties, repeat denials, but none of it works because the core problem isn't presentation, it's substance. When your government keeps changing its mind and then pretending that it never really promised those things anyway, there's no slick communication strategy that makes that look good. There's also something darkly funny about a transport secretary getting absolutely railroaded in an interview about U-turns. The metaphor is almost too perfect. It's like having the health secretary get